Good afternoon, everybody. Hello, and welcome to the Korea Society's to today's program here at the Korea Society, the North Korean cyber threat. Thanks for joining us. My name is Tom Byrne. I'm the president and CEO of the Korea Society. Today, we will discuss North Korea's cyber security threat, a large and growing concern with critical security, economic, and diplomatic implications. We are delighted to be joined by two speakers who have unique experience and knowledge relevant for today's discussion. It's my great pleasure to introduce them. First, we welcome back Jean Lee, a veteran foreign correspondent and expert on North Korea. Jean is co-host of the Lazarus Heist podcast for the BBC World Services, and she also serves as a public policy fellow at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. Thanks for joining us, Jean. Next, we welcome, for the first time at the Korea Society, Michael Barnhart. Michael served 18 years as an intelligence professional, starting with human intelligence collection with regular Army and Special Operations. He then shifted to cyber intelligence at the legislative branch of the government, and with a focus on DPRK threats targeting the U.S. government. Currently, he heads DPRK operations with the cybersecurity firm Mandiant. Great to have you with us, Michael. I'd like to interject here, that our interest in this topic or this threat started back in 2017 and 2018, at the time when we found out about North Korea's cyber heist of Bangladesh. We've had public programs as well as roundtables on this issue since then. Before we get started, I'd like to thank the Korea Foundation and our corporate sponsors for making this program possible, the names and logos of which are displayed on the screen in the elevator lobby on the 24th floor here. The moderator for today's program is the Korea Society's Policy Director, Jonathan Corrado. I will now turn the proceedings over to him. Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Tom, and thanks everybody for coming. Thanks everyone for signing up online to watch this. Very exciting. I'm so happy to welcome Jean and Barney. Can I call you Barney?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's absolutely Barney. Who's Michael?
I'm more Barney than anything at this point.
All right, and glad that you're showing off the tats today.
I was so hot here.
Okay. So this is a really exciting conversation. We've got so much to get through. I want to start off with a couple fast facts just to ground us. So what's odd about North Korea's cyber prowess is that only a very tiny fraction of their population has access to the internet in the first place. A lot of their cybercrime is conducted underneath the auspices of their spy agency, although there are some exceptions to that, and maybe we can get into that later. And they're doing not just cyber attacks, but also espionage and theft. So lots of different types of attacks that they're conducting. Last year was one of their most profitable years ever for crypto heists. Nearly $2 billion taken in crypto. So pretty significant amount. But before we get into all that, I want to start with a little bit of bio, talk about your unique backgrounds, because you both bring such unique perspectives to the table that comes from your own personal experiences. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. And Jean, let's start with you, one of the very few people that has been able to go in and out of North Korea quite frequently, learned a lot from those experiences. So how does that kind of affect and color your perspective on these issues as you see them today?
Yeah, so I had the opportunity to travel to North Korea as a journalist. I was given this mission of opening an AP office in Pyongyang. There were no U.S. news bureaus in North Korea at the time, and my first trip was in 2008. And I was there 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, started working on negotiating the opening of that office, brought North Koreans here to New York to negotiate that, and opened the bureau later that year, earlier the next year. So what I will say is that when we look at North Korea from the outside, I don't know if we wanted to show some.
Yeah, let's do it.
Show some?
For sure.
Well,
so these are Barney's.
So when we look at North Korea from the outside, we are hampered by a very heavy veil of propaganda. The North Koreans do their best to control the information and the images that we see. Now, that information, I will say, it's actually so useful for us looking at North Korea from the outside. And there's incredible work being done by that open source intelligence, crucial work. However, what I found was that when I was in North Korea, I discovered that there are many, many more layers of information when you're there living and working with the North Koreans. I was there day in and day out for weeks at a time for years. And once all the parades are over, the theater is done, and they've shut the curtains, and life goes back to, well, I won't say normal, but goes back to what's typical for daily life in North Korea, it's a very different North Korea. Now, I probably should have shown some images, because I'm kind of showing images that they want us to see. I probably should have shown you some images, but I did that here at the Korea Society years ago. You can see it on my Instagram account of what North Korea looks like in between the theater. So getting behind the curtain of the drama that they try to present. But in the context of what we're talking about today, what I wanted to mention was that I was there from 2008, right, to 2017. One of the things I noticed in my first few years, which was the tail end of Kim Jong-il's rule, when he had had a stroke and they were preparing a son to take over, was an investment in science and technology. I wasn't quite sure what to make of it, but I could see that there was a strategy formulating around using science and technology to build a sense of loyalty around this young man who's a millennial who was being prepared to take power. And so I did write a series of stories. I called it the digital revolution. And there was always a part of me that was wondering, is there another side to this? Is there a nefarious side to this that we need to be aware of? I am not a cybersecurity expert, but this was always in the back of my mind. Is there some other element that we need to be looking at? Right. And so when the BBC approached me and said, we want to do a podcast around North Korean cyber, but we need somebody to give us the context and the background, right. That was where I stepped in, and I thought, this is a chance to really explore all of what I was seeing in North Korea in the early years of Kim Jong-un's leadership and try to use that for us to understand how he was using science and technology to build his leadership, his legacy, and then what that means for us in terms of the nuclear program. Probably more than you know.
Awesome, that's perfect. And so you've been tracking this for a long time, and then your instincts as a journalist to find the human stories to make this stuff understandable to people who aren't Barney, right? Who's just living in the code and knows how to understand this stuff just by virtue of that knowledge and experience. It's so helpful. So.
Well, just to that point, I did want to bring a human side to this because when we're on the outside, we can start to think of North Korea as almost a fictional place. The North Koreans as people who are just lurking in the shadows, people we don't have contact with. But of course, for me, these young men were people that I knew very closely. I was very close to the young men who worked for me were very similar to the young men who were sent abroad. And so in a way, I also want us to recognize that they're human beings at the end of the day, not only the hackers, not to rationalize or justify what they're doing, but for us to recognize that they are under certain pressures and also the cost that the North Korean people are paying when their government, their party, the regime is devoting so much of the resources into military defense, nuclear weapons, missiles, when they don't have the basic resources. Right. They don't have heat, they don't have food. So just trying to remind people that there are real people who are both carrying this out, living among us, okay, maybe not here right in Midtown, but around
Roosevelt
the world.
Island.
Roosevelt Island, absolutely. And just a couple blocks away at the North Korean mission, but also that the people back in North Korea that we don't have contact with right now are paying a price.
Absolutely. Great point. So Barney, I'm going to turn to you. So your job right now is to hunt down North Korean cyber threat groups. It's a crazy job. Yeah, how did you get here? Can you walk us through your bio a little bit?
Yeah, first off, I'm going to do my best to not to cough into this mic. I've been trying to clear my throat. Now it's all I could focus on and blow a speaker. But I'm not the hacker hunter, but I am the ringleader of several of them. It is a really, really kind of a weird origin story, as if I'm a villain or hero or whatever. But thank you, I appreciate that. After 9/11, which after 9/11, at that point I was just kind of buying time until I was old enough to join the Army. A few days after I turned 17, I was off. The main thing I was doing there was tactical raids, interrogations, source operations, doing human intelligence collection, which is vastly different from where I ended up. But the cousin, I started off with the regular Army, ended up in special operations, and then slowly started to transition to SIGINT, which is signals intelligence, is a cousin of human intelligence, and then did that for some time. Started working around the DMV and started doing working at different elements in that whole region. And I started working more in nuclear proliferation. Started doing bunker investigations and focusing on the major countries. But I started getting my hand into North Korean efforts at that point. From there, the cousin to as Humint and SIGINT are cousins. The cousin to SIGINT, a cyber, and the OPM hack had happened, and I said, well, that seems like fun. I want to get in on the cyber stuff.
OPM,
Yeah.
Office of Personnel Management.
Yes, that was the big hack, the big leak, along with the Anthem and the other ones happening. And I was sick of being deployed to the Middle East or stuff like that. We never go to the Bahamas, so I was like, I'd rather just switch to more of a different job. And started taking courses at night. Started learning, getting a cyber degree. Started focusing on that, and then ended up starting a team within the legislative branch of the government. And again, I'm more of an Iran guy by trade, but while I was at these different government organizations, I would see North Korea just pummel these people. And I didn't understand why we had such a lack of understanding, lack of information on them. And until you kind of really step back and realize if you don't have cyber information or defector information or imagery analysis or some type of North Korea is not built that way. And so no one wants to touch it. And so I at the time was FireEye, and we had this guy named Michael Schilling, who was our account manager. And I told him, I was like, one day I'm going to go to, FireEye, Mandiant, or CrowdStrike, and I'm going to be your guys' North Korea guy. Joking. Years later, I now run North Korea operations, oversee it for all of Mandiant, and I have all of my questionable hires, the team of misfits that get after these bad guys every day. Or not bad guys, just adversary. Everyone's a hero of their own story. So we're here now. We're moving. We're cooking with gas. We started off with one actor that I know Gene is familiar with. We liked how that felt so much. We wanted to get after the other ones, and now we're going after everything we can as long as we have the bandwidth to do so.
You have to sort of hold back, right? Because there's so many that you want to go after.
I literally, yes. I had a conversation about that earlier. It's like, you take this one, I'm going to be over here, and we'll have to strengthen numbers. And that's kind of what we were getting at today. And I think we're going to be getting at in the future is collaboration. We all, I say it, I hate saying this because I say it so many times, but it's like, we don't need a 9/11 to happen to suddenly care about that.
Yeah.
Like everyone was a counterterrorism expert after that happened. Why do we need to wait for North Korea to get to do something drastic to have everyone's attention focus on it? We should be proactive instead of reactive. We should start collaborating, communicating, and be the experts now instead of the experts afterwards.
So, is this the time to tell them about your tattoo?
Hey, I don't see no reason why. My foot's up.
If you want to know just how obsessed this guy is about North Korean hackers.
Yes. So we had an Unc
He's got a
1130
tattoo.
right there. You can't really, I'm sure you might be able to see it. And there's also a bug bite because I'm from Florida, right there in the middle of it. It looks like I have it. But it was Unc 1130 at the time, and as a publicity stunt. And again, this is what we were talking about, where we're trying to get everyone paying attention and
So can you tell us what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an UNC. It's a categorized cluster. No one cares. It's the one that encompasses the open source actor named Kim Sookie. I put it on my foot and I showed it to everybody in the company. And I was like, I did this. I care. Do you? Does anybody?
So does everyone have a tattoo?
No. But now they want me to put the next actor I'm going after on the other foot, and
your whole body's gonna be covered.
It's going to be just adversaries. I mean, at this point, why not? It worked because after some time and people started looking, then we graduated this UNC 1130 to APT43, which was the end goal, and now it's on there because of the publicity stunt. That's a forever mark, and I'll do it again.
So you're going to cross it through if you wipe them out?
I'm going to do something. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm waiting for you to get yours, though. We can go get them together.
Teardrops. I think that would look
oh my
good.
God, teardrops, Gene. That'd be fun.
Gene, you'd look great with some teardrops going.
To be determined.
So because of what you do, Barney, I think a lot of people on stage here, I think I could say, feel a little bit safer. It's something that we're really vigilant here at the Korea Society, something that our president pays a lot of attention to, and our IT director, Peter, pays a lot of attention to. And I bet a lot of people in this room might have been targets yourself, or watching online might have been targets yourself. So hopefully later in the program, we could talk about some safety measures that can help enhance the security of everybody. So for now, I want to step back a little bit. And Gene, this one's for you.
Okay.
Big picture strategy, North Korean cyber. What is their posture? broadly speaking, right now? And how does that fit in holistically with North Korea's geopolitical place in the world?
Yeah, I think that when we mention the word cyber, there are a lot of people whose eyes glaze over and they think, oh, that's a tech issue that I don't need to pay attention to. We'll leave that to the geeks and the nerds. Oh, pardon me. But, I think that somehow cyber just,
Absolutely.
along with the word crypto, and I'm guilty of that as well, I am not a cyber expert. I focus on North Korea, but I could see, as I was saying earlier, I could see there's an investment in science and technology. And so when you're looking at North Korea, you also have to follow the money. You have to chase the money. And you have to follow the illicit money-making schemes to understand where they're getting the resources to fund the nuclear program. Now, today couldn't be a better example of how all of this is relevant. So last night, Barney and I went for a drink, and I think that night I saw an alert from South Korea saying that there had been a missile launch. And then this morning when I woke up, it said it was a suspected intercontinental ballistic missile launch, possibly of a new kind. So we're seeing more and more details, lofted trajectory, about 620 miles, 1,000 kilometers, but it's triggered some warnings in Japan.
Right.
Didn't end up going over Japanese territory, but you can imagine being in Japan, how terrifying it is to get an alert in the morning as you're getting ready for school or for work saying, please take cover, right? And then, of course, those of us in this field think, at what point is Japan or somebody going to decide that they need to defend themselves? Could this trigger a conflict? So there's a lot of concern about these kinds of tests. Now, how is it that North Korea, which has been under some of the strictest UN sanctions we've ever seen for years, has closed its borders since the start of the pandemic, how are they getting the resources to continue building these ever more powerful, ever more diverse weapons? And so, of course, for me, I'm thinking we need to look at the strategic thinking. I do think that Kim Jong-un had been planning ahead, that he is waging these provocations, testing these weapons, knowing that they might come with a punishment. They might come with sanctions. So was thinking years ago about how he was going to build the resources to get around the sanctions. Mm-hmm. They could institute the border closures because they had another plan. So there's that money-making, and in season 1 of my podcast, we go through some of the history of the amazing illicit money-making schemes that the North Koreans have undertaken over the years, super notes, some of which I accidentally had, and methamphetamines. I think that crypto and cyber theft is another form of that illicit money-making, but one that has brought them so much money. Yeah. So it cannot be ignored. Now, I will say that I do think that there's another strategy at home, and I mentioned this earlier, which is to build loyalty among the next generation. Mm-hmm. Young North Koreans are, just like young South Koreans, transfixed by technology. And I did a little bit of research. I was in the hospital at one point, and I just spent the time watching North Korean dramas. And so I did a paper, and one of the dramas that I watched in North Korea was called Young Researchers. And it was interesting. They take us into the classrooms and really try to project this propaganda about teaching their young people to use science and technology as their weapons to defend their country. This was in 2012 or 2013. Okay. And at that point, I thought we should be paying attention to this. They're encouraging a whole generation of young people to think about how to be patriotic using science and technology. And so I think there are multiple strategies. He's a millennial, Kim Jong-un. He needs to have this young power base, future power base. He has to think about how to appeal to them, to think about how to build a future. Right. There's the other strategy, which is if he can have a bigger arsenal, if and when he gets to that negotiating table, again, we saw the talks over a nuclear deal break down in 2018 and 2019, he wants to be in a stronger position. So he's been thinking about all of these things, making sure that that investment addresses a number of needs both at home and abroad.
Excellent. Very well put. And to what extent do you think he's been able to cover the gap, that the dent that sanctions has put in his export revenue earning machine, oil, fisheries, textiles? is the cyber activity able to fully compensate for that? Do we think, or even earn more? Or what level do you think he's at in terms of covering that loss?
So
from
there are
sanctions?
probably people in this room who have those figures more readily available than I do. Does anybody here know? So the in terms of how much, in terms of the numbers, I think that the number correct me, but I think we're looking at almost at least more than $3 billion in cyber theft over the last several years. Somebody could correct me.
I think even no matter what number we throw out, it's going to be a low ball number because you don't know what you don't know, and they're so oftentimes you don't even know that this is a criminal organization, that this is actually a nation state. So I mean, whatever number we actually have, I bet it's way higher than we're expecting.
Yeah. Okay.
And it may seem like a small number in the scheme of things, but this is a small economy we're talking about. So it does. I think the U.S. figure was that they believe it accounts for 40% of that 40% of those funds are going toward the nuclear program.
Yeah.
Everything's a guesstimate, right?
Yeah.
But I think we should just recognize that a significant chunk of that is going toward the nuclear program. How much of it is going back to the North Korean people? Not sure.
Yeah.
Probably very little. And so that's why I say we also need to recognize that there are people who are suffering and paying a price because of this strategy that the regime has taken.
And if we were to compare like a typical North Korean export year before the 2016-2017 sanctions kicked in would be about $2 billion in earnings. But
you have the numbers.
Just that one. I don't know how much they're earning from cyber, but that would be much more evenly spread out through the population, right? How many people are working in factories that make garments that go for sale in China, right? Much more evenly spread out. The crypto is all going to Kim's coffers. So he made $2 billion last year in crypto alone. That's kind of covering, but really just very heavily concentrated in the regime's hands. So troublesome implications.
Yes, and I think that that's a good point, which is that we suspect that very little of it is getting back to the people. But we don't see that. We're not there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We don't have any Western diplomats there. Journalists are not there. We don't have anyone who can tell us how it looks behind the curtain.
Right.
And so that's certainly a big concern that I have, is that all that basic infrastructure, already so weak, is further damaged and depleted.
Yeah, and concerns on food shortages right now, echoes of the late 90s.
Yeah.
So yeah, really, you've got this humanitarian disaster at the same time that you have a real legitimate security threat. So it's very difficult to diplomatically.
Yeah, and yet they are incredibly resourceful because they've been dealing with sanctions for decades.
Yeah, the pros.
They're very
Absolutely.
resourceful. They're very resilient. But I don't think we should underestimate the price that the people are paying.
Yeah. Okay, so Barney, we just talked about why they're doing what they're doing, and I hope that you can help us to understand how they're doing it. And we got a question from our good friend and Korea expert, Matt Ha, and also RFA reporter, Jae-Woo Park. And they want to know about the evolution of their capabilities, how sophisticated they're getting. I said in the last few years, and you joked in the last few weeks. This is a quickly moving target, right? So if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think also to kind of step back and just look at the problem as a whole, just the easier way to wrap your head around it, even with what you were saying when we talked about regime and all these things. We are still looking at it as a government, and it's more of an aligned as more of a mafia family, where the one family, the 3-generational dynasty runs, and they have slush funds, and you pay everything back to that. And when you kind of frame it that way, and then you look at their cyber espionage focuses, and you look at their criminal, and you look at even listen to the podcast, they're making fake Viagras. I mean, this is a mafia. This is a mob. And so framing it that way definitely helps, and it's helped me a lot too. I stole that, by the way. I did not come up with that. But I also told them that I was going to steal it. The how they're doing it and the way, so we have this picture right here. It's, again, this graph we did here is an estimation. Again, everything is assessed because, like Gene said, if there's no one
Barney's mic just cut out.
test. Oh, I'm here. Sorry.
There we go. We're back.
Sorry. I'm gone again.
Maybe we can get one of those handhelds.
Of course, it'd be me that did
It's the hackers.
it. Yeah, right.
Thank you, Peter.
Let me drop this. Okay. Thank you, Pete. I appreciate that. And again, sorry. So again, this right here, this is an assessment because, like G said, if you don't know, unless you're inside these units and doing that, and a lot of times, we kind of do the best guess based on targeting and infrastructure analysis and just who they're going after and how many people they're using to go after this to kind of build out these assessments. Kim Sookie right there is the one that APT43 who. That's the one I had on my foot. We've since graduated them, but again, this right here was made in the middle of the pandemic, and at the time, I was kind of focusing on some of the units that had spun up because of the pandemic. As you can see, the Bureau 325. Those were an amalgamation of several other units that were saying, "Hey, we need to. This is a real problem that's happening right now. We need to form a unit to mate of all the other units." They're very agile. They're very adaptable. I mean, to the highest level. You can work on one effort one day and then immediately turn to the next day. I'm going to be an expert at blockchain. And these guys they're just kind of built that way. They're very, very agile and very adaptable to their environments. Whenever we started breaking them down, you had the UFD and your propaganda efforts, and we kind of pulls them off to the side. And then we had some units that we kind of associated with the Ministry of State Security. Again, we don't know. This is a very, very changing, evolving landscape. But this right here was done, 2019, 2020. I've since made another one of these graphs that's not public in the last 2 months. And in the past 2 weeks, I need to rearrange everything.
Wow.
And honestly, in the past couple hours, I might need to rearrange some things. The days where we can be like, oh, this is the unit, these are the guys, it's kind of gone. On the podcast, I complained about how we're calling everything Lazarus Group when really there's several units. They took it to heart, and now there's all kind of one group, and everyone's sharing, and everyone's and it's very interesting because that's the right answer. It's more efficient on their part. It's streamlined, and everything everything's moving quicker, and they're sharing and collaborating. And I think a lot of that had to do post pandemic.
So what are they sharing when you say they're sharing?
So for right now, we see a high the sharing of malware. So if you can see this is a communist regime. These guys shouldn't be talking. So whenever during the pandemic we saw Bureau 325, we saw Tim Hermit. Tim Hermit had a specific malware dropper, and it was using a payload from Kim Sookie. Now, they should not be talking to each other. But they had to. They were either forced to, or the pandemic left them outside their borders. They isolated them. So now they're a little bit more able to talk and share. And you see pieces of tooling. Everyone has their own flavor. You might see a fingerprint on this one that's a little bit different from this unit, or the targeting doesn't match because everyone has their own piece of the pie. But that's just they're. Again, you had mentioned it too, Gene. We're underestimating them, and we absolutely are. And they want us to. And hiding in the noise of cybercrime, hiding in the background, being that guy that no one takes no one's paying attention to because you're not a Russia or a China. Yeah. They're really thriving in that role, and it's wild.
Yeah. So you talk about them like you know them. Do you feel like you're familiar with them in some way?
I personally am not familiar. Gene, are you? Do you want to tell?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are probably many people out there and in this room who've inadvertently communicated with one of these hackers. We have to be super careful because what you don't want is to communicate them with so much that you give them access to a network, your contacts, your database, because that exposes your entire world as well. I'll often have people say, well, I have nothing to hide. It's like, it's not just you.
Yeah.
You are opening the door to an entire world of networks that they want to get access to. And so I know we'll get to best practices, but someone like me has certainly, when I was in North Korea, I had to assume that all of my equipment was compromised. So I took all of that into account. So how to keep myself safe in that circumstance where it's so obvious. But I found that I was also compromised everywhere else. And so I was a very early target of that. Now, I now have Barney. So anytime I get something suspicious, I can send it to Barney. And I think I have done that. And you said, yep. It
was much appreciated and helped with our targeting. And anybody gets get my email. I'll take whatever you got. I can manage payloads and see what they're doing next.
So everyone needs their own Barney.
Everyone
Get
needs
your
that.
own.
You can hire him. You can hire him at Mandiant. But I think that, to that point, it's some of these emails that I'm getting look totally innocent. They come from people I'm familiar with, so I have to look at every email very carefully. If I'm not responding to your LinkedIn request, it's because I need to do due diligence, and I think quite a number of them are possibly hackers. And I can tell by the correspondence. They're looking for information. So this is the kind of hacker, for me, it's not cyber theft, they're looking for information. And so but maybe you can talk a little bit about what it looks like from your side. What are you seeing?
Well, no, you kind of touched on a point there. They're looking for strategic information here. So again, this isn't the same. And I think also too, the community, private sector, everybody, we are kind of spinning our wheels trying to attribute every single tiny thing when sometimes, it might get in the way of the actual mission itself. And so as Ms. Jean said, there with the strategic, that's more of your Kim Sookie type. They're a strategic level. They're looking for ways to bypass sanctions. They're looking for Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Each one has their thing. And APT38, they're going to almost live only exclusively on the blockchain. They're there to steal crypto or do crypto operations. And Darl is one that we really got to watch out for. And they're the brother to the Kim Sookie group, whereas they're not strategic. They're the ones that actually have the hands-on to work with the nuclear weapons and to do some type of weapons development or procurement of some sort, to include research and development of these items. So everyone has their piece of the pie. Everyone in this room, in the Korea Society, and everyone associated with that, I think from our targeting perspective, you would probably be more likely to see someone like a Kim Sookie come after you, or an APT43, rather than, I don't think we have any crypto billionaires in here, so you might not be the target. But for this, they're wanting to know what we know and what you guys know. And so that would be more of what we would say on that front. But it's all who you're going to be. If you go to a bank, they don't care about Kim Sookie, so.
Right.
But I think, Tom, we were talking about the Bangladesh bank heist, which is a huge, the North Koreans are trying to steal $1 billion. We go into this in season 1. And with almost all of the hacks, it starts with an email with a link. It's so innocent. You click on the link and you expose your entire network. We start with the Sony hack, actually, and that same thing. And then we go to Bangladesh, and then it's WannaCry, so that's season 1. And then season 2, we start with the fast cash ATMs, which is jackpotting.
Okay, so this is what I want to get to now, because this is so interesting. So if you're not checking out the Lazarus Heist on BBC, check it out.
Thanks for that plug.
Because it's excellent. And Jean, I already gave you this compliment, but I'll do it publicly. You've got an all-time podcast voice, just epic.
Thank you.
True.
See some
No
agreement
training.
here. Yeah.
Just lots of singing Korean songs growing up.
Oh, that's a trick. Okay, I'll start singing some Korean songs.
Yeah.
So tell us about jackpotting, and this is going to be some spoilers for maybe the first episode or 2 of Lazarus Heist. But this is really so fascinating. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, I'll just tell you a little bit. So season 1, we start in Hollywood with the Sony hack. And season 2, we start in Vegas at the casinos. And actually, we start in 2010 with this young New Zealander, Barnaby Jack, who sadly has passed away since. But he gets on stage at a Black Hat conference, and he has ATMs on the stage. And he connects his computer, and he shows that he can get it to spit money out. And so we try to imagine, oh my gosh, if you're a North Korean hacker, you're like, that is amazing. Jackpot. How do I, ka-ching, how do I get that to do that? So the North Korean, what we recount in episodes 1 and I think episode 2 is exactly that. And so what they did was do this 12,000 times in 28 different countries in a narrow period of time. It was about 2 hours. At 2 hours, and I don't even, all of a sudden, these ATMs just started spitting money out. So it's interesting because then you need people to collect that money, right? So there's a whole process, and this is similar to what we did with season 1, is not only the coding, which I don't understand, but also what you do, how you get that money back to North Korea. Yeah. So that's the jackpotting. So it's this idea that the North Koreans are there, they're watching for innovation, and they're building on it. Now, to your point, to both of you, what you're saying, we underestimate them because it's a country that's really disconnected. What I find fascinating is Okay, and I do recount this in episode 1, I think, which is my first reaction was they don't even have ATMs in North Korea. We did everything in cash. I had debit cards. But this concept, so this requires you as a North Korean to be living overseas and understanding how we bank, how we spend our money, what we do online. So then you start thinking, yeah, they need to have these North Koreans abroad to really understand how we do things because they can't do that back home. So that's also interesting to me, and that's why I try to place them in our world. So Jackpotting was just crazy scheme. We focus on how it played out in India. It's just one of the 28 countries, and then we go from there. So multiple different heists that we cover, but that's the first one. And I think the video, if you look it up, of Barnaby Jack is giving this presentation, and you think like a North Korean, you're like, wow, that is, how do I do that on a grand scale? And we called it, I think, a global flash mob because it was like this global operation, takes time and networks to execute. And that's what we need to understand about the North Koreans is they have time, they have patience, they are going to plan this, orchestrate it, carry it out with their networks to an excruciating detail.
Thanks, Gene. Really interesting, Barney. Yeah.
Yeah, and on that same point, I mean, literally, you teed me up at the very end of that, and I'm going to tee you right back with crypto. How adaptable they are, like how adaptable we can. Again, I don't want to get hung up on attribution because it's just spinning wheels. But like we had Sony hack, Bangladesh, WannaCry. That was all, as we saw in the DOJ indictments, Park Jin-hyuk. So that's one guy doing very, very wildly different things: destructive attacks, ransomware, and then cyber theft. So that really speaks to how like he was an expert in all of those things, and that's kind of the way they designed that. And so just the back to the adaptability, that's a great case in point to it, to include jackpotting, which is what they had attributed to that same similar group, the APT38 at that time. But then also as much attention they got from Bangladesh heist and all those type of things, that's whenever they're like, we don't like this. This took way too long to do. We lost a bunch of money to the handlers in the
middlemen.
The middlemen lost a bunch of money. This has been a nightmare.
Yeah.
Let's switch to crypto. And so you saw a significant shift in that time.
Yeah.
And season 2 of Lazarus Heist podcast about crypto. So.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about your recent Mandiant report about APT43. So this is not their logo.
I made that. Our team made this.
Yeah,
and
okay.
There's reasons why. First off, I didn't want it to make them look so cool. I'm not a fan of like making the adversary, but there's every tiny little thing has a reason here. Of course, the star, we get that. Late op malware that they love is actually open source. They call it a lot Baby Shark, so we put a little shark head on the front of that rocket. Again, this is a nuclear focused strategic collection and group going after nukes and rockets in foreign relations, really. So on that thought, we had think tanks. I put a book with a light bulb on it. We thought that was cute. I just didn't know how to represent a think tank in a small graphic. Gene, that's you out there in the second one. They're going after journalists or pretending to be them.
Yeah,
like
the mustache is very clear.
I didn't know what. We're trying to get creative.
I thought this was a J, but it's a hook.
It's a hook.
Okay.
It's a fish.
Spearfishing. I like that.
Spearfishing.
APT, you use that for all these. What does APT mean?
Advanced persistent threat. And this one, you could probably just put PT on this one because they're not advanced. What they do is they really capitalize on the social engineering aspect, but they are persistent. And Eli Fox, one of our key team members, he has a quote that I really love. It's what they lack for in sophistication, they make up for in volume.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a good point. We decided to call them the Lazarus Group because I think that's an interesting name. The U.S. government initially was calling them Hidden Cobra. I just hate snakes. So I was like, no, sorry. I'm sorry, USG, no Hidden Cobra. But I think Lazarus Group, each of the cybersecurity firms has a different name for these suspected hackers.
Absolutely, there's a million of them too. It's trying to figure out, the correlate. Oh, this guy's this one. Oh, this is that group. It's again spinning wheels, and I think it's probably a better time that we're actually focusing on the work. And so I think the community is really trying to get better about that too. It's like, okay, let's call them something, and then let's just get after them. So
yeah. Okay, so these are some of the slides associated with your recent Mandiant report. So in case you have any thoughts to add on to here.
Yeah, I think probably the biggest one is that it's misleading. Back on the graph right there. This one right here, it's you don't know what you don't know, and there's so many intelligence sources coming into this. There's so much information that this is just what we had in our holdings. This is not an accurate representation, because APT43 is a dual purpose. They go after different things. So from a strategic, with actual like what they're there for, they're an espionage-based unit. They're there to get the intelligence and the espionage. So that's kind of what we're seeing here: South Korea, Japan, UK, America. These are the usual suspects. These guys have to fund their own operations in the same way that some of the other, you probably heard about the ransomware incidents where they were knocking over hospitals to support their own espionage efforts. That was a different group. This group does it a little bit different. They kind of focus more on the crypto side of it, but that has nothing to do with their espionage. So anyone who's ever used your credit card, all of us, online to shop or do anything, that you've opened yourself possibly for them to take your PI out, your personally identifiable information, and to either use it to funnel money through you, to take money from you, to help themselves, to set up crypto miners on your network so that they can start harvesting.
So this is what I want to ask you. So they're doing like high-tech money laundering, right?
Yes.
So like how do they do that?
The best with our crypto guy, Joe Dobson, he says it best here. He gave me this analogy, and it's again, the crypto mining, that's just to support the efforts, and anyone's a target there. So this is kind of just the targets on the espionage side. It's crypto mining. This is one of the very interesting things we found with this actor that I think was kind of our flash in the pan on it, and it was that everyone's wanting to know, how do you launder the money? How are they getting it? Where's the money coming out at? This is, again, follow the money. That's the best way to track really any group with physical or cyber. But the way they had done it is they were taking it and they were going to hash rentals. And a hash rental service is, hey, I'm a service. I will give you all this hash power. You can, if you don't want to use your own computer to mine for cryptocurrency or do all these things, you can rent it out with us. We'll take a small fee, and then we'll give you a brand new, different coin, or do anything. So the best analogy is that that APT43 was stealing all this cryptocurrency. Again, not large amounts. This is a group not for revenue generation, just to support their own operations. They would steal money, crypto, and then they would run it through a hash rental service. So they're stealing gold, going to a silver mine, paying the miners in that stolen gold, and said, I want whatever silver you can give me back.
Wow.
And now everyone's still looking for the stolen gold, but they're walking around with all this clean silver. And that's what we're seeing, and that is kind of our aha moment. The crypto miners are different because they're going through pools, but for the hash rental services, that was our and it was underneath our nose the whole time. We're like, oh my God, this is a genius. Of course, they're the most clever people on the planet. Like, of course, they would have figured this out. It's I think that's probably the most basic analogy for it. That's, again, she was talking about cyber and crypto glazing over. When people start talking crypto, I have to snap out of it too, because it's a lot of stuff.
Well, we try to break it down in season 2 so that it's accessible and understandable for people who are not experts in this field. I'm not even sure I understand it, so I need to make sure that when we tell these stories, that even I can understand it. And I'm very bad at everything related to science and math. But I wanted to make one point, which I think, following on what you're saying, is that we should remember that under UN Security Council sanctions, member states were supposed to send all the North Koreans back home to North Korea by December 22nd, 2019. George, did I get that date right? Yeah? Okay. So they were supposed to send them back. But remember that North Korea closed the border in January 2020. And so I think a lot of people just didn't get back to North Korea. A lot of them are still out there. The estimate by the U.S. government and the UN panel of experts is that there are thousands of North Korean IT workers still out there. Mm-hmm. And to your point, they still have to support themselves. They're not getting money from their country. Nope. So that means that there's an extra layer of, I would say, is it desperation or pressure for them to make money? So it's something for us to remember as well.
That's really fascinating.
Absolutely. And on those, the group, the chart that actually had them, you can kind of see the ones you have groups that are just there for crypto. You have groups, some of the ones that we've seen even on this chart, which are APT43, the Kim Suki, and Daryl. Those are guys that clearly are strictly cyber espionage focused. that also have to figure out a way to fund themselves.
Survive.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's different ways. I mean, you have Indaro mainly dealing with ransomware, and Kimsuki43 is kind of dealing with the crypto. It's very, very, very interesting. But also on that fact, again, evolutions, and you asked about what's going on.
Yeah.
It seemed like APT43 is really liking crypto. Like what once was a I need to fund myself, with the activity we're seeing coming out of APT43 right now regarding crypto is staggering. And we're talking while we were investigating some crypto efforts, one of the guys in our team member, one of our team members, Joe Dobson, he had gotten fished with the activity that he was looking into. The targeting scope is in the millions.
Wow.
Okay.
And what's so fascinating here is that they demonstrate some of the same properties that are completely opposite of what us more generalist North Korean observers are anticipating, which is that they're going to be stovepiped, they're not going to be agile, they're not going to communicate with each other, and they're going to evolve to a limited degree only under the discretion of the leadership. It seems like with cyber, all that stuff is completely out the window. They are moving fast and breaking things to steal from Zuckerberg and Facebook. So it's very, very different from what us North Korean observers might have anticipated.
And I do think it's a bit of a blind spot in our community that we relegate cyber to a security or tech issue, when really it needs to be incorporated into all discussions around diplomacy, sanctions, the nuclear program. And so I would love to see, thank you for hosting us for this event, because really I think we need to be discussing this in the context of everything that North Korea is doing right now.
Absolutely.
It is core to their money-making operations, and it is a part of their strategy, I should say, Kim Jong-un's strategy. Can we go to that email again? Because we didn't quite, because I wanted
You recognized it, Gene?
Yeah, because these are the kinds of emails I get from hackers where they're asking my opinion. And sometimes I'm tempted. I'm like, should I reply so that they have a better, but when I get an uptick of these types of phishing emails, I also recognize that they're looking for information because they're trying to prepare or set up for negotiations or possibly. Like, we should be thinking that they're actually hungry for information because part of the campaign is focused on the next step, which is possibly negotiation.
Well, you said it best. You said it when you first started talking. You said it best with the Japan stuff last night, Gene. This is exactly that. If we tested it, this is literally if you take what you took last night, will a more proactive defense from Japan. Literally, the activities from last night echo what we've seen. This email is from October of 2022. So the planning, just like you said, absolutely, they're well ahead of the game.
Wow.
So this is interesting. They're looking to people like us to get information about what we're thinking and what we're advising the U.S. government, right? What are we advising South Koreans? What are we advising the public? So that's interesting to keep in mind. And I do pay attention to these types of emails to get some insight into the information that they're being asked to solicit from us or steal from us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Can you read? Can they all see this?
I think, there's a monitor over there, so maybe that's a little bit easier. I wanted to ask about your favorite question, which is attribution. So we got a couple questions about this from Professor Rudiger Frank and from Albert Goldson, all asking about how do we know it's really them when we think it's them?
You want to start that? Because last night you had mentioned even with the languages, and I'll pile on after that if you want.
So for someone like me who spent a lot of time in North Korea, I had to learn the North Korean dialect. And when I see, so it's a little bit like American English versus British English. There's a slight difference in spellings. It's like, I think I used harbor, right? They put an
theater,
yeah. So similarly, North Koreans spell things, and they use different words. And I know this personally because I had to speak to the North Koreans in their dialect, so I had to learn their language. And when you showed me an image, I said, oh, that's a North Korean spelling. That's a North Korean word. And I think that South Koreans don't have much exposure to North Korean language, culture, or they don't interact with North Koreans. Yeah. Defectors often learn very quickly to speak South Korean. Yeah. So I don't know that South Koreans would necessarily recognize. Well, they would recognize that that's not a word that they use or a spelling that they use. So there are little clues like that for me, but from a cybersecurity expertise, there are crumbs that they leave, right? Mistakes that they make.
Absolutely, mistakes, fingerprints. Sometimes you always hit a gold mine whenever the government will put out an indictment, because a lot of times you get all kinds of pieces of information that might tie up loose ends that you had gaps in your aperture. Again, just going off language alone, it's too flimsy of an attribution mistake. So what a lot of professionals do, what we do at our company and our team, we follow the diamond model, AICT, adversary, infrastructure, capability, and targeting. Again, you need to have certain points that are going to hit on each one, and each one isn't going to help you. It's going to give you a good idea, and unless you've seen them doing it on the keyboard, or you're watching them do it, and it's them, and you're not doing it's false flag or something. That's the only way you're going to get it, and it's a pipe dream that you're never going to get. So you try to deal with the adversary. If that's the question you need to do, you need to attribute. Okay, so you're going to have to go with the infrastructure. What does the infrastructure look like? They were using a word in Korean that wasn't South Korean. It was more tailored to North Korean. Well, that's a good heads up, but I don't want to focus on that. Let's keep going with the other ones. The targeting. The targeting is definitely in their wheelhouse. It comes from this, the capability and the want, the actual intent to do it. You have to really wrap all these things up, and you have to make your best assessments. Like, hey, this is a lot of what we do. And on that chart, we don't know their RGB. We have no idea, but we assess that these things or this group kind of falls in line with this. And suddenly North Korea is using cryptocurrency per the UN reporting to supply their weapons programs. Oh, and I'm seeing a lot of cryptocurrency. Oh, and I'm seeing a lot of weapons testing. You take all those into a factor, and then you sometimes you wait for a Park Jin-hyuk type of a DOJ indictment, like, oh, that's the IP I was looking at. Oh, thank God. But
we shouldn't give away too many details, because we don't want them to be clued in.
Absolutely.
But I will say that the FBI has been following the North Korean hackers for a very long time, and with great detail. So the indictments are, I've read through all of them. I have them, my eyes, seriously, it's like this thick. That, and then all the UN panel of expert reports, like a whole shelf full of reports. But there are so many details in there. And one of them might be, for example, using the recycling emails.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's how the Park Jin-hyuk, the Chosun Expo.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And this is interesting to me, because I know with my own staff that they don't have their own email addresses, my own North Korean staff. They all have to, because of surveillance, they have to log into the same email address. So that's a practice that they may have instituted overseas as well, or in Pyongyang, but it tripped them up because it means they were using recycling email addresses for different hacks, and that could tie the hacks together.
I want to get to some of our in-person audience questions, so start to cogitate on what you might like to ask. I think we've got one in the back there. So I'll say, please try to, I think we got one back there. So please try to keep your questions question-like, and tell us your name before you ask your question.
Charles Henderson. I have a question regarding once a cyber attack comes in, do you then take an offensive move in order sort of reverse hack back to them, or give them so you can try to sabotage them from possibly doing that in the future? And the second part relates to the question of the currency. Since there's so much currency that seems to be lost going to North Korea, are you having any success just either preventing them from getting the money, or actually clawing back the money, or is it just gone if you can't prevent it?
Okay, thank you very much.
For the first one, just due to legal authorities, my company and the company that I'm with, we don't do any hackbacks or do anything on those lines. I want to foot stomp that for the life. That's more of on the government side, whether it be the U.S. government or South Korean government. Or, I'd have to defer to them on that one. But as far as the cryptocurrency aspect, I think right now where we're at this stage, I do know that there's efforts both with the U.S. government where they're trying to, they're always saying, hey, let us know of these incidents, and there's a possibility we could actually get this money back, depending on, because these entities, they will hold it and they will try to return it, but again, That's not me. What I'm trying to do right now with the cryptocurrency stuff is, at this point, we're in the process of just making people aware. And again, things like the Lazarus Heist podcast, this is where everyone's starting to figure out the problem that these guys have already began to master. And so I think right now we're at the point where we need to get everyone on the basic, the level of what even is cryptocurrency, how does it operate, and then it's going to create those more discussions on how are we getting this back, how can we combat this, how can we disrupt their operations on their end. So that's kind of how we're dealing with it at this point.
And maybe there's a good opportunity. I'm keeping an eye out for other questions to talk about. Mako. Let's go to Mako.
Hi, I'm Michael Takeuchi. Great to meet you again. My question is about the security hack. So especially the U.S. guideline about like how to detect North Korean hackers, IT workers. You said, they say that, they avoid timely chat, or their English is weird. But ChatGPT and all the AI development, they can conquer that kind of U.S. guideline. Hey, be careful about this point, and they can always, do something else to conquer this problem. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, do you have any other security hack to counter or prevent any, North Korean attack, or what's a new challenge to address North Korea's whatever social engineering.
We were actually disagreeing about this, because I was saying I can always tell because the English is a little wonky, but then he's saying, no, I think their English has gotten pretty good. So
I barely speak English, so that's everyone remembers on the BBC podcast I called it Juchi, and she corrected me as Juki. I call it Juke.
It's like Juki.
So I'm not the right guy.
Very cute version of it. I like Juki.
No, I think, but yeah, they're constantly evolving. They're very innovative. And yeah, they will use whatever technology is out there. And we're certainly seeing them utilize technology around crypto to help them anonymize their cryptocurrency and to evade the capability to claw that money back. So we should keep in mind that they are out there. They're spending all day, every day thinking about what the vulnerabilities are in our cultures, our societies, our lack of regulations, our systems, and where to go after that vulnerability. And I think we're starting to see the U.S. government really trying to address each of those holes, like fill those, stop the triage. But the North Koreans are constantly evolving.
The way that our IT director Peter likes to call it, it's the cat and mouse game, because it's
absolutely
whack-a-mole.
Yeah.
And two, when you think of just software development or anything, I mean, really just anything type of development, you build it to work first, then you try to secure it after. It's not the right answer, but it's the real answer. And who always adapts to technology first? It's criminals. And again, thinking back to this is not an actual government, more of a criminal enterprise. Then you get, and I've said this before too. If it wasn't crypto, if it was back to '90s Furbies and Beanie Babies, I'm sure they've counterfeited that. So it's just, this is what's working right now, and until it, first off, it seems to be skyrocketing in terms of how active they are, and so I don't see a slowdown anywhere in sight. But it's, whack-a-mole, and again, to kind of get on a soapbox, it requires all of us. It requires all of us to collaborate, communicate. Private sector, governments, we all have to get together, because just to tackle this very, very, very skilled, very unique actor set takes all of us.
So there are some entities that are not reporting cyber theft because it's embarrassing.
Yep. Or hospitals and stuff like that.
Yeah, and to your question, Charles, was it about clawing back the money? There was a CNN story that went out, good report about a joint. They called it a sting operation, but I think maybe that's not the right word, right? But I think they clawed back 1 million of $100 million that was stolen by alleged North Korean hackers. So
we just got back 1 million.
I believe
they kept
it's a start.
So, but then that money is still sitting in these wallets, and the North Koreans, I think, they're patient. They are willing to let it sit there.
Because if they move it, then we
can
kind of
see it.
alarm bells go off.
Yeah, so I think that's something that we should keep in mind, that they have they're working on behalf of the state. They have a longer term mission. It's not just one guy in some cases they are one guy who's trying to make money to survive, but generally speaking, they have a broader mission, and they're willing to sit and wait and figure out how the technology is changing so they can eventually cash that out or spend it.
Or cashing out is something that I've been wondering about too. It's like, oh, when are they going to take this into actual fiat? When are they going to do something with it? Why should they? We're starting to see governments around the world start to accept crypto exchanges and crypto payments. So maybe this stuff never actually gets converted. Maybe they just use it as a foreign credit that they can use.
Especially for the kind of thing they might want to buy, which might be available on the black market.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this brings us to a natural landing place. I want to get to Mark Manier.
Hey, thank you very much for doing this. Very interesting. Mark Manier with the South China Morning Post. So I'm wondering, what's the reward structure? What are the rewards for these ne'er-do-wells, and in the way of apartments in Pyongyang and this sort of thing? And what is that doing to a fairly traditional Confucian hierarchy of older people generally having more respect, and as you work your way up through the party and this sort of thing? Thanks.
Yeah, I think you said it. There is a reward structure. I think that it's hard for us to really comprehend how people are compensated in North Korea, but when you exceed your quota or you excel on behalf of the party, you're rewarded for that. So their compensation is a little bit different than what we're used to. I also like to point out that we're going to see an uptick in activity around times of year like this, February, April, because those are the birthdays of the leaders. And often these big acts are seen as a birthday gift or an offering to the leadership. And I think that if we do it's quite possible that this ballistic missile test that we saw today, they sometimes characterize these as sending a gift to the leaders up in, I don't know if they call it heaven, but essentially. And I think many, many years ago, they actually attached a satellite that was playing like Song of Kim Jong-il, right? So, but in terms of, I think you understand the reward system very well. In terms of a Confucian system, I think their system is very, very different. When I was in Pyongyang, I could see that these young nuclear scientists were being treated, I think I called it like rock stars. They were always, I would stumble across a huge party, for example, to celebrate them. And so it's interesting because if we want to fight them effectively, we're going to need to treat our own young force of cybersecurity experts and white hat hackers the same way. I think this is a particular challenge for South Korea. I think that South Korea's young white hat hackers are not properly compensated and don't have the respect within their society to take on that kind of a sacrifice on behalf of their country. So I think every country needs to think about, how do you compensate these? Yeah. You've got this force of young men in North Korea who are being treated like rock stars. Do we have the capability to treat our young men and women with that capability so that they're working on our behalf as well?
Okay, so I'm going to take two more questions real quick, Tom, and then up here. Sorry, just for time.
Yeah, thanks, Barney and Jean. So some central banks are moving into issuing digital currencies. Nigeria has the e-naira. I think Jamaica is, and PBOC, China's central bank, I think did a pilot program during the Olympics. Is this on your radar screen yet for North Korean hacking? And I mean, the North Koreans did hack the international payments and transfer system between banks, the SWIFT system. Would central bank digital currencies also be fertile ground for North Korean hackers, or can they be made unpenetrable, invulnerable to North Korean hackers?
Good question. Let's get two so that we can answer as a bundle, and this will wrap us up.
Right here in front.
Hi, I'm Jess. Thanks so much for being here. This is a much more rudimentary question relating to, is in the bad actors matrix, is there one operation that is committed to taking out like hacks on infrastructure of other countries?
What infrastructure you say?
Hacks.
Is
there an entity that is committed to like infiltrating the security of other nations' infrastructures?
Like a global
like, hey, let's try to take out the power grid in New York City and see what happens type
Like
of
we
thing.
saw the ransomware attack on the pipeline earlier, so something like that, right?
So this is
Absolutely.
definitely something that they're doing.
I thought it was a great question, actually.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so we got 2 questions. I want to take the last one too, because there's just one more. So sorry to overload our
Absolutely no.
speakers. I know that remembering 3 questions is tough, but central bank digital currency, infrastructure, and if the last one, if we could keep it simple, that would be helpful to our speakers.
Sure. I hope it's simple. Jonathan Lee, Wired. You mentioned AP343 as not an advanced threat, but a persistent threat, but also that the DPRK is very savvy and resourceful under the circumstances that they're in. So one of the quotes you said from someone on your team is what they lack in sophistication, they make up in persistence.
In volume. They make it more volume.
So what is the sophistication then that they're lacking? Like, is it technological?
Absolutely. I guess I'll start. I'll 1, 2, 3 if you don't mind. This was the easiest one, and for me at least, in the fact that I'll go wherever the adversary goes, and right now they seem to be very, very, very have treated crypto as a priority, and so if wherever we're starting to implement crypto into our environment or the global environment, then we absolutely are going to start beginning to pay closer attention to that, as it is an absolute great attack surface, and it wouldn't be as big of a deal if they weren't so successful at it. And you can always shake a stick at every crypto heist we've seen, and everyone just knee-jerk reaction. I feel like they're like, "Oh, North Korea's back at it again." So as we move over to a crypto in world, I think anyone that has their hand in it is something we're going to start paying attention to, and it is a focus for us. Absolutely. Did you have anything for the Gene? I don't want to hog
Well,
this.
just on the digital currency side, I would say that there's a danger. It's appealing in some ways, but there's a danger to these. I'm not an expert in this area, but there's so little regulation already when it comes to cryptocurrency, and then we have other digital currencies developing. The North Koreans are going to look at the lack of regulation and see that as a vulnerability that they can take advantage of. I suspect.
Yeah, absolutely. The question for you for like the critical infrastructure, we have one of the groups that is more aligned to that and to the targeting scope for that. That would be your Andarial group. It's also the group that Mako and I had been talking about yesterday. This is my new APT43. Andarial is the one we've circled. I think in the sense that, as Gene alluded to or talked about earlier, we had a missile launch, ICBM launch last night. We're getting with the questions that we see even on the screen talking about, how are we going to upgrade the defense? Are we going to do this? They're telling us their cards and showing what they find interesting, the strategic intelligence requirements for their organization that their leadership is passing down. You mix that with where we're at, and every other day I feel like we're waking up to a missile launch. Andarial being the one that would be the more facilitator and the one, I'm going to go hack this organization to get XYZ information to help that weapons development. Whereas a Kim Suk-hee is just going to find out what everyone's saying about that so that they can find out how to sanction or bypass that. I think Andarial would be the one, but also they're the ones that have dealt with this in the past. I think that not only have they done, they were talking about the destructive attacks. Was it the Dark Hotel, or we had talked about this earlier
Dark
on.
Soul?
Dark Soul. They had broken stuff before. They're big on destructive attacks. They're the ones that are ransoming hospitals to facilitate their cyber espionage endeavors. But they also have publicly reported the rifle malware is associated with that group, and that was the one that went after the power plant in India, I believe. So it's everyone has their forte, and it kind of leads into your question, Sarah. It's the sophistication piece. What Kim Suk-hee is doing doesn't need that amount of don't fix what ain't broken. And right now, I think again we talked about last night. It's like I can make a 0-day exploit that comes into the roof and it steals Gene's purse, and it's like, oh my God, this is so sophisticated. How did they do this? Or you could be APT43 and just come in and ask for it, and then they'll give it to you. So it's I think they're not at the point where they need to rely on the sophistication of the other actors, whereas your traditional, like your APT38, your Andarials, your guys are doing these big heist. I mean, that is skilled stuff, and I think 43 has it in them, but why have a nuclear weapon where you can get the job done with a pistol?
But and from a non-technical side, as somebody who isn't looking at this at a granular level like you, I do see that the North Koreans are much more clever and aware of how we live than we think, but they're still awkward. They're still not sophisticated. Sorry, but they're still, they make mistakes, and we see that in the communication. So the social engineering, they're very bold with the social engineering, but you see a lot of mistakes. So they're still learning how it is we communicate, how we operate, how we interact, but they're going to get better. I wanted to mention Rudiger. I wanted to address, was it Rudiger's question about attribution? Yep. So we do, I don't know if it's episode 5 or 6 of season 2, but we get to the question of false flags and how North Korea, the North Korean hackers that other hackers are now trying to emulate their signature signs, stealing their code. And so it makes it very, very difficult, even harder, because they're such rock stars now in the hacking world, for us to make sure that it's the North Koreans. So there are so many layers of challenge when it comes to attribution.
So
did we answer her question about, Jess's question about?
Infra? Yeah, I think Barney got it. I want to thank, first of all, you guys, and I'm going to hold for the applause in just a minute, but first I want to thank Peter, our IT director, our intern Jiwon, and also Bridget and Sungho, who are helping us virtually, Claire, communications officer, Tom for supporting this program and others like it. We've got another program April 27th. That's going to be North Korea Creative Thinking and Lessons Learned. So that's a really cool one. Stay tuned. I hope many of you can join us for that as well. And I don't know about you all, but I am very impressed and so happy that Gene and Barney were able to join us today. I learned a ton, and I hope that our audience did too. So please join me in thanking them.
Can I just make one plug?
Which
is that in the last couple of weeks, not only this report, go look it up, but also the UN panel of experts, the recent report that just came out has a lot on cyber, which is new. So please take a look. And then also we've seen the US government and the South Koreans and the Japanese put out joint statements,
yes,
very specifically targeting this topic. So if you're a nerd like I am, please go take a look at this. It's fascinating.
Podcast.
And a podcast. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.